which one of these works best? Belt sander, flap disc, wire brush, or orbital sander. So we've got this 20 by 37 deck. We made a mistake, okay? We put a quote stain on it that was sold to us by Sherwin Williams as a stain. It was not a stain. It turned out to be paint, and it's flaking off 3 years later, like ridiculously flaking off. So I've already gone over it with the big pad sander that I rented, the big industrial one that's like 24 inches wide or whatever, and with the big 36 grit pads, and knocked down all the high spots, and that took a lot of the paint off, but you can still see there's a lot of brown left here. We want we want the wood to look like this, where it's like natural wood again, and we're going to stain it with the real stain this time. So which of these works the fastest? But my next question is which is going to leave the wood finished like I want it? So can I do this all in one step, or is it going to take 2 steps? And that's what we're going to try to find out today. Which of these works best by itself? So I'm just hitting it one time. All right, so for my test piece, I marked off 4 1-foot sections here, and they're about the same finish. They got about the same stain left on it. Now, in case you're wondering, yes, we've tried the pressure washer, we tried the big orbital sander, the big giant industrial one. Neither one of those worked well. I'll show you at the end of the video why I changed my mind about the pressure washer, and you may already know that answer. That's the thing about all these. This was somewhat used. This is not new, it's used. This is used, and the flap disc, you can see, is not new either. It's been worn down already some. So first is this Porter cable belt sander. This thing's no joke. It's pretty powerful. The con of it's very powerful. It strips things off really well. This is a kind of a little bit of a used 36. Well, it's pretty used, isn't it? 36 grit, and it's a closed coat. Of course, it's still got a lot of life left in it, as long as it doesn't come apart. But it is really hard to hold on to this because it's so powerful. Okay, now we'll try the wire brush out. This is a 9 amp 4.5 inch angle grinder. Okay, now I've got a Makita palm sander. A little bit used, but 50 grit. This is an 8 amp 4.5 inch angle grinder with a 60 grit. The Warrior from Harbor Freight, 4.5 inch flat disc. Okay, so we have the belt sander, and it did a pretty good job. You can see this big hole it didn't get in. I don't expect it to get in that. Nothing else is going to get in that except maybe the wire brush. I could gouge this out with the flap disc as well. Okay, this wire brush worked really well at stripping the paint off, but you can see what it left underneath, and it just doesn't take this off. And so the palm sander, actually initially did better than I thought it did. I thought it was going faster, and I thought I was done once, and then I realized I wasn't, so I started again, and then I thought I was done again, but that's just because it's making this paint. You can see there's still a bunch of paint here, and there's a bunch of paint there, all in the cracks, and you know, this still feels pretty rough, and honestly, this is the finish I'm looking for right here. This looks like closest to the finish, and I think it was the fastest. We'll have to look at the time. The nice thing about the flap disc is, just like the closed coat belt sander, when it hits a screw that's a little bit high, it's just going to take it down immediately. So, and I've already ground most of these screws down that were sticking up. This is the finish I'm looking for right here, though. You know, the palm sander is going to take a lot of pressure and a lot of work, and even with a heavier grit, I'm not feeling it. This wire brush works really well at stripping the paint off, but then it leaves this finish on here, and if that's what I was going for, but I really want this kind of finish right here, so when I put my new stain on it, I think it'll take the stain better than this will. Okay, and then finally, the belt sander, I bought this to finish the floors inside the house when we were putting flooring down, and it worked really, really well for that, for leveling and for knocking down high spots and that kind of thing, and roughing the floor up so it would take the glue. And it does a pretty good job here, but as far as the amount of work it takes, it makes a bunch of dust, and this thing makes a bunch of dust as well, but they're so effective and so fast. So I'm going to put my dust mask on, and I'm probably going to roll with this. Okay, so we rented the big giant industrial Orbital sander. It's like, you know, 20 inches by 15 inches or something, big 36 grit pad. I think it was 120 bucks for me to rent it for 4 hours, and the 10 pads that I used. But you can see where it's knocked down some high spots here. Some of these boards need to be replaced, obviously, but it did a good job of knocking down the high spots here and here. You can see where it's all back to natural wood. Some of these boards are sticking up pretty high, so it's done a lot for just leveling it out. So I'm happy I got it for that. Okay, now as far as the pressure washers go, I've heard people say don't pressure wash your deck, and I always thought, well, that's because they don't want the moisture to get in there, because then it won't let it dry long enough, and then there will be moisture trapped underneath your stain or your paint or whatever. I don't think that's the biggest issue. I think the biggest issue, now that I've done this, once we went over it with the 2100 PSI pressure washer, and it did a pretty good job. You know, it stripped off a lot of the paint, but I thought, well, I just need a bigger pressure washer. So I bought a 300 PSI pressure washer, and that was awesome. That even with a flat nozzle, though, it didn't want to lift the paint. But with that rotary nozzle, whatever you call those things, the turbo nozzle, I think some companies call them, that spins around a circle, that did really well. At stripping the paint up, but both of them, literally, you can see where it's just ripped the fibers of the wood apart. Here it's just kind of gouged it, and of course this wood's old and bad already, but especially look along here. So this edge, you can see, you know, it's not water getting into the wood and staying in there and then keeping your stain or your paint from not adhering. The biggest problem is it separates the fibers of the wood because the water pressure is so high, stripping the paint off. It'll strip the paint off, but it also spreads the fibers of the wood apart so that the wood will degrade and break down faster. So just look at that. That's pretty, you know, that's not going to work. Even a high PSI pressure washer, which I thought would make things better, would strip the paint off better. It did strip the paint off better, but it also jacked the wood up. So I'm not going for that. I've actually sanded this part right here. It was really, really bad. This flat part of the wood looked like this after the 300 PSI pressure washer. So some of you guys are saying, well, that was dumb. Well, you know, I didn't know at the time, so this was a good learning experience for me. And hopefully it'll help somebody if you're thinking of pressure washing your deck just to get the old paint off. you know, you can try it, but if it's destroying, if it's separating your wood fibers and making them stand up and peeling the wood fibers back where they're all hairy like that along the edge there, you can really see it sticking out there. This may not be a good idea.